Imagine discovering that everything you believed about humanity's place in the universe was a carefully orchestrated lie. Picture the moment when you realize that the beings you trusted most have been secretly learning the most efficient ways to eliminate your entire species. Now imagine being the only person who knows this truth, standing in a room full of alien creatures who have just finished their final lesson in human extermination techniques. This is the story of Dr. Marcus Chen, a linguistics professor who thought he was helping humanity make first contact with a peaceful alien civilization. Instead, he became an unwitting instructor in humanity's own destruction. But what these advanced beings didn't count on was the very human trait they had been studying to exploit: our unpredictable capacity for hope, sacrifice, and the refusal to surrender even when facing impossible odds. What started as humanity's greatest achievement would become its darkest hour, and only one man stood between survival and extinction. This is the true account of how Dr. Chen turned their own lessons against them, proving that sometimes the greatest weapon isn't technology or superior intelligence, it's the indomitable human spirit they could never truly understand. Dr. Marcus Chen adjusted his glasses for the third time in 5 minutes, a nervous habit that had intensified since the visitors arrived 6 months ago. The underground facility beneath the Nevada desert hummed with alien technology, its walls lined with crystalline panels that pulsed with soft blue light. He stood before a group of 12 beings that defied everything humanity thought it knew about life in the universe. The Kythera, as they called themselves, were tall and graceful, with elongated limbs and skin that shifted between silver and pale gold depending on their mood. Their large, dark eyes seemed to absorb every detail, missing nothing. They had come to Earth claiming to be peaceful explorers, offering technological advancement in exchange for knowledge about human culture and biology. World leaders had been ecstatic. First contact had finally happened, and it appeared to be everything humanity had hoped for. Marcus had been chosen as their primary instructor because of his expertise in xenolinguistics and cultural anthropology. The Kythera had specifically requested to learn about human behavior, psychology, and what they termed survival mechanisms. At first, Marcus had been honored to be part of this historic exchange. Now, as he prepared for what he believed was another routine lesson on human social structures, an uneasy feeling gnawed at his stomach. Commander Zyxera, the apparent leader of this group, tilted her head in that peculiar way the Kythera did when they were particularly interested in something. "Professor Chen," she said in her melodious voice that somehow managed to sound both beautiful and slightly unsettling, "today we wish to understand how humans respond when facing mortal danger. We have studied your historical records, but we require more specific information about physiological and psychological reactions during life-threatening situations." Marcus cleared his throat, trying to shake off his discomfort. "Well, the human fight-or-flight response is quite complex," he began, pulling up holographic displays that showed human anatomy and brain activity. When faced with immediate danger, the amygdala triggers a cascade of hormonal responses. Adrenaline floods the system, heart rate increases dramatically, and blood flow is redirected to major muscle groups. The Kythera leaned forward as one, their dark eyes fixed on the rotating 3D models of the human brain. One of them, whom Marcus had come to know as Scholar Vexini, raised a delicate hand. "These pressure points you have shown us, Professor. If one were to apply force to them during this heightened state of arousal, what would be the result?" The question sent a chill down Marcus's spine, but he answered professionally. "Well, targeting certain nerve clusters during a stress response could cause temporary paralysis or unconsciousness. The human nervous system becomes more vulnerable when flooded with stress hormones because..." As the lesson continued, Marcus found himself describing increasingly specific details about human vulnerabilities. The Kythera asked about optimal angles for applying force to joints, the exact amount of pressure needed to disrupt various organ functions, and detailed questions about how long humans could survive without oxygen under different atmospheric conditions. Their questions became more pointed. How quickly could humans die from blood loss? What toxins were most effective against human metabolism? Which psychological techniques could render humans unable to resist or call for help? Marcus answered each query mechanically, his academic mind engaged while a deeper part of him began to sound alarm bells. The session lasted 4 hours, longer than usual. The Kythera took detailed notes using devices that recorded not just his words but seemed to capture the very essence of the information itself. When they finally concluded, Commander ZYX approached Marcus with what he had learned to recognize as her pleased expression, a slight luminescence to her skin and a barely perceptible relaxation of her features. "Your instruction has been most illuminating, Professor," she said. "We believe we now have sufficient understanding of human defensive and survival mechanisms. Tomorrow will be our final session before we return to our home world to compile our cultural report." After the Kythera left, Marcus remained in the chamber, staring at the holographic displays that still showed human anatomy with highlighted vulnerable points. The facility felt different somehow, colder despite the warm ambient lighting. He tried to rationalize his growing unease. The Kythera were scientists, just like him. Their questions, while specific, could easily be explained by thorough academic curiosity about a new species. Every anthropologist he knew would ask similar questions when studying an unfamiliar culture. But, as he walked through the corridors toward his quarters, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. The way the Kythera had looked at the vulnerability points, the intense focus when he described how to incapacitate humans quickly and quietly, the careful notes they took about psychological manipulation techniques, it all felt less like scientific inquiry and more like military intelligence gathering. His quarters were sparse but comfortable, designed to accommodate long-term residents in the underground facility. Marcus sat on his bed and opened his laptop, intending to review his notes from the day's session. Instead, he found himself accessing the classified files about the Kythera's arrival and the establishment of this exchange program. The official reports painted a picture of benevolent explorers sharing technology while learning about human culture. But, as Marcus dug deeper into the technical specifications of their ship, the requests for specific types of information, and the timing of their arrival, patterns began to emerge that made his blood run cold. The Kythera had arrived just 2 months after humanity had achieved a breakthrough in quantum communication technology that could theoretically send signals across vast distances instantaneously. They had specifically requested information about human military capabilities, population centers, and what they called behavioral prediction models. Most disturbing of all, they had asked for detailed genetic samples from diverse human populations, claiming it was for medical research to ensure safe interaction between their species. Marcus realized he had been naively focused on the cultural exchange aspects while missing the bigger picture. Every piece of information he had provided, every vulnerability he had described, every weakness he had detailed, it was all being compiled into what could only be described as a comprehensive guide for conquering humanity. The weight of this revelation hit him like a physical blow. He had been carefully manipulated into becoming humanity's unwitting betrayer. The Kythera hadn't come to learn about human culture, they had come to learn how to destroy it efficiently and completely. And tomorrow would be their final session, after which they would return to their home world with everything they needed to plan humanity's extinction. Marcus stood up abruptly, his mind racing. He had to alert someone, had to warn the authorities. But who would believe him? The Kythera had been careful to maintain their benevolent facade in all official interactions. His accusations would sound like paranoid delusions, especially since he had no concrete proof beyond his own growing certainty about their true intentions. He paced his small room, trying to think clearly despite the panic threatening to overwhelm him. The facility was isolated and heavily secured, ostensibly to protect both humans and Kythera during their sensitive cultural exchange. In reality, Marcus now realized, it was designed to prevent exactly what he was now trying to do: raise an alarm about the Kythera's true nature. Communication with the outside world was strictly controlled and monitored. Even if he could get a message out, it would likely be intercepted and dismissed. The Kythera had been too clever, too patient in their approach. They had spent months building trust and credibility while systematically gathering everything they needed to ensure humanity's defeat. As Marcus contemplated his options, he heard soft footsteps in the corridor outside his door. He froze, listening intently. The footsteps stopped directly outside his quarters and remained there for several long minutes. Marcus held his breath, wondering if the Kythera had somehow detected his growing suspicions. Finally, the footsteps moved away, but the message was clear: he was being watched. The next morning would bring the final session, after which the Kythera would depart with their comprehensive guide to destroying humanity. Marcus had less than 12 hours to find a way to stop them, and he was completely alone in an isolated facility surrounded by beings who possessed technology far superior to anything humans had ever developed. But, as he sat in the darkness of his room, planning what might be humanity's last hope for survival, Marcus began to realize that the Kythera had made one crucial mistake in their assessment of human nature. They had studied human weaknesses exhaustively, but they had failed to understand humanity's greatest strength, the ability to find hope and fight back even when facing impossible odds. The very traits they had been cataloging for exploitation might also be the key to their defeat. Marcus had spent months teaching them about human vulnerabilities, but he also knew things about human resilience and unpredictability that weren't in any textbook or database. The question was whether he could find a way to use that knowledge before it was too late for his entire species. Marcus spent the sleepless night formulating a desperate plan. By dawn, he had reached a terrifying conclusion: the only way to stop the Kythera was to complete their education in the most unexpected way possible. He would give them their final lesson, but not the one they were expecting. The morning session began like all the others. The 12 Kythera arranged themselves in their usual semicircle, their elongated forms perfectly still as they waited for instruction. Commander ZYXera's skin showed the faint golden luminescence that indicated anticipation, while the others displayed the neutral silver that meant they were in full learning mode. Today, Professor Chen, Commander ZYXera began, we wish to conclude our studies with a comprehensive examination of human responses to hopeless situations. We are particularly interested in the psychological breakdown that occurs when humans realize they cannot survive or escape. Marcus nodded slowly, his heart pounding despite his outward calm. That's a fascinating topic, Commander. Before we begin, I'd like to demonstrate something that our previous sessions have only touched on: the concept of human unpredictability under extreme stress. He moved to the central control panel and began calling up new holographic displays. Instead of the anatomical charts and vulnerability mappings they expected, he projected images of human history: warriors facing impossible odds, scientists working under deadly conditions, ordinary people performing extraordinary acts of courage when everything seemed lost. You've learned extensively about human weaknesses, Marcus said, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. But there's something about our species that can't be quantified or predicted, something that has allowed us to survive everything from ice ages to global wars to natural disasters that should have wiped us out completely. Scholar Vexini shifted impatiently. Professor, while this historical context is interesting, we require specific data about psychological collapse patterns. How long does it take for humans to accept defeat? What are the observable signs that resistance has ended? Marcus smiled grimly. That's exactly what I'm trying to explain. The answer is that sometimes humans never accept defeat, no matter how hopeless the situation appears. And that's your fundamental miscalculation. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The Kythera's skin began shifting from silver toward a darker hue that Marcus had never seen before. Commander ZYXera stood slowly, her movements suddenly predatory rather than graceful. Professor Chen, she said, her melodious voice taking on an edge that cut like ice, you seem to be deviating from your instructional parameters. We require specific tactical information, not philosophical observations. Oh, but I am giving you tactical information, Marcus replied, stepping closer to the group despite every instinct screaming at him to run. The most important tactical information you could possibly have. You see, I know what you really are and why you're here. The Kythera became perfectly still, a collective statue of alien attention focused entirely on him. Marcus could feel the weight of their gaze, but he pressed on. You're not explorers or scientists. You're scouts for an invasion force. Everything you've learned here, every vulnerability I've taught you, every weakness I've cataloged, it's all going back to your home world as an instruction manual for conquering Earth. Commander ZYXera's skin had turned completely black now, and, when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that hurt Marcus's ears. You have served your purpose well, Professor. Your instruction has indeed been comprehensive. Whether you understand our true nature or not is irrelevant. You are isolated here, and tomorrow we depart with everything we need to ensure the efficient subjugation of your species. That's where you're wrong, Marcus said, his hand hovering over the control panel. You see, you made one critical error in your approach. You studied human weaknesses exhaustively, but you never truly understood human strengths. And, more importantly, you underestimated what a human will do when they have absolutely nothing left to lose. Before the Kythera could react, Marcus slammed his hand down on the emergency lockdown control. Immediately, blast doors sealed every entrance to the chamber. The air circulation system shut down, and the facility's quantum communication array, the only way to contact the outside world or the Kythera homeworld, went into complete isolation mode. The lockdown protocol was designed to contain dangerous alien pathogens, Marcus explained as the Kythera began moving with sudden, frightening speed around the sealed chamber. Once activated, nothing gets in or out for 72 hours. No signals, no communications, no escape. Scholar Vexini had shed all pretense of scientific curiosity. Her form began changing, becoming more angular and threatening. You cannot prevent the inevitable, human. Our ship maintains communication with our home world. When we fail to report, they will know to proceed with the invasion. Marcus laughed, a sound that surprised him with its steadiness. Actually, that's not true. I spent last night in the facility's computer systems. Your ship has been transmitting on a specific quantum frequency that I've now blocked using our own technology. As far as your home world knows, you're still conducting peaceful research. The revelation sent the Kythera into coordinated action. They moved as one toward the control panel, but Marcus had anticipated this. He pulled out a small device he had constructed during his sleepless night, a simple electromagnetic pulse generator built from components in his personal electronics. One step closer and I destroy every piece of alien technology in this room, he warned. Including your translation devices, your recording equipment, and, most importantly, your environmental suits. For the first time since they had met, Marcus saw something like Fear Cross Commander ZYXera's transformed features. You would kill us all, including yourself. The atmosphere in this sealed chamber will become toxic within hours without our environmental processors. Exactly, Marcus said calmly. That's the human trait you never understood. When faced with the extinction of our entire species, some of us are willing to make the ultimate sacrifice. You studied our weaknesses, but you missed our greatest strength, the knowledge that some things are worth dying for. The standoff stretched for long minutes. The Kythera had arranged themselves around the chamber, clearly calculating options for overwhelming him before he could trigger the pulse device. But Marcus had positioned himself carefully, with clear sight lines to all of them and his back to the control panel that he could operate with his free hand. Let me tell you what's going to happen, Marcus continued, his voice taking on the tone he used for his most important lectures. You're going to sit down and listen while I give you the rest of your education about humanity. You wanted to know about psychological responses to hopeless situations? You're about to get a first-hand demonstration. Scholar Vexini hissed something in their native language, a sound like wind through crystalline caves. Commander ZYXera responded with similar alien syllables before returning her attention to Marcus. What do you hope to accomplish, Professor? Even if you prevent our return, our people will eventually discover what happened here. The invasion will proceed, perhaps with even greater brutality. Maybe, Marcus acknowledged. But, maybe not. You see, you made your plans based on the assumption that humanity would be caught completely off guard. You counted on the element of surprise, on our ignorance of your true capabilities and intentions. But, I'm going to change that equation. He gestured to the recording equipment around the chamber, all of it still functioning despite the lockdown. Everything we say and do in here is being recorded by both human and Kythera systems. When this facility's automatic systems restore normal operations in 72 hours, those recordings will be transmitted to every world government simultaneously. The implication hit the Kythera immediately. Their skin colors shifted rapidly through spectrums Marcus had never seen, indicating what could only be described as alien panic. You cannot threaten the security of our people, Commander ZYXera said, but her voice lacked its earlier certainty. I'm not threatening anyone, Marcus replied. I'm just ensuring that humanity gets the same advantage you've been working to secure for yourselves, complete intelligence about their enemies' capabilities and intentions. As the hours passed, the sealed chamber became a classroom unlike any in human history. But, this time, Marcus wasn't the instructor. The Kythera, realizing their situation was as desperate as his own, began to reveal information they had never intended to share. Under pressure, they spoke of their dying home world, their desperate search for new planets to colonize, and their cold calculation that humanity represented both an obstacle and a resource to be harvested. Marcus recorded it all, knowing that even if he died in this chamber, humanity would at least face its enemies with full knowledge of what was coming. The Kythera's technological advantages were immense, but they had planned their invasion around surprise and human ignorance. Without those advantages, the outcome was far less certain. As the air grew thinner and the temperature began to drop, both human and aliens settled into a strange sort of détente. They were all going to die together in this chamber unless something changed dramatically. The question was whether Marcus had bought humanity enough time to prepare for what was coming, or whether his sacrifice would ultimately prove meaningless in the face of superior alien technology. But, as he looked around at the 12 beings who had planned to destroy his species, Marcus felt something he hadn't expected, a grim satisfaction. He had turned their own tactics against them, using their desire for knowledge as a weapon. They had come to learn how to kill humans efficiently, and, instead they had learned what it meant to face human determination when everything was on the line. 18 hours into the lockdown, the atmosphere in the sealed chamber had become a toxic mix of depleted oxygen and rising carbon dioxide. Marcus felt the familiar lightheadedness that signaled the beginning stages of oxygen deprivation, but his mind remained sharp with the clarity that sometimes comes to those facing death with purpose. The Kythera had arranged themselves in a complex geometric pattern that seemed to help them conserve energy and share their remaining environmental resources. Their skin had taken on a dull, grayish tone that Marcus interpreted as their equivalent of exhaustion. But their large, dark eyes remained fixed on him with an intensity that suggested they were still calculating, still planning. Commander ZYXera broke the silence that had stretched for hours. "Professor Chen," she said, her voice now carrying a raspy quality that suggested even their advanced physiology was struggling with the deteriorating air quality. "Your sacrifice accomplishes nothing. Our people will investigate our disappearance within a standard cycle. When they discover what has transpired here, they will proceed with invasion protocols immediately." Marcus managed a weak smile despite his growing fatigue. "You keep saying that, but I don't think you really believe it anymore. You see, I've had 18 hours to think about your behavior patterns, and I've realized something interesting about your species." He paused to take several careful breaths, conserving his strength. "You're not warriors. Everything about your approach to this invasion screams scientific methodology. You don't conquer through brute force, you conquer through superior information and precise application of knowledge. That's why you spent 6 months here instead of simply attacking. You needed to understand every variable before you could guarantee success." Scholar Vexini shifted uncomfortably. "Your analysis is irrelevant to the outcome." "Is it?" Marcus asked. "Because I think your people are just as methodical as you are. When you disappear, they won't immediately assume hostile action. They'll investigate. They'll want data. And they'll certainly want to understand how an apparently primitive species managed to neutralize an entire advanced reconnaissance team." The Kythera exchanged glances, and Marcus caught something in their expressions that gave him hope. "That's right," he continued. "You're not just scouts, you're their best scientists, their most skilled intelligence operatives. The fact that you've been contained by a single human using improvised tactics is going to raise some very uncomfortable questions about the accuracy of your assessment of human capabilities." Commander ZYXera's skin flickered through several color phases before settling on a deep purple that Marcus had never seen before. "You cannot know our protocols." "I don't need to know your specific protocols," Marcus replied. "I know how scientists think, regardless of species. When an experiment produces unexpected results, the proper response is to gather more data, not to proceed with flawed assumptions. Your disappearance here will force your people to reconsider everything you've reported about human capabilities." As if to emphasize his point, Marcus activated one of the backup recording systems he had programmed during the night. The chamber filled with holographic displays showing detailed analyses of everything the Kythera had revealed during their captivity, their technology, their homeworld's condition, their invasion timeline, and, most importantly, their psychological profiles and decision-making patterns. This information will be transmitted to human authorities in 54 hours, Marcus explained. But, even if your people arrive before then, they'll find a complete intelligence package waiting for them. Every question they ask, every probe they conduct, every scan they perform will be recorded and transmitted automatically to backup locations around the globe. The psychological pressure was clearly affecting the Kythera. Their careful composure had given way to visible agitation, and they had begun communicating among themselves in rapid bursts of their native language. Marcus couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakably urgent. Finally, Scholar Vexini stood and approached him directly. Professor Chen, perhaps we have been too hasty in our conclusions about your species. If we were to reach an understanding, a negotiated solution to our respective needs, would you consider deactivating your precautions? Marcus studied her carefully. What kind of understanding? Our homeworld is dying, she said, and, for the first time, her voice carried what sounded like genuine emotion. Our star is entering an unstable phase that will render our planet uninhabitable within 50 standard cycles. We require a new home, new resources. But, perhaps there are alternatives to conquest that could serve both our species. Such as? Commander ZYXera joined the conversation. Your species possesses certain technological innovations that we had not anticipated. Your quantum communication systems, your adaptive manufacturing capabilities, your biological resilience, these are assets that could benefit both our peoples. Perhaps a partnership rather than conquest would serve our long-term survival better. Marcus felt a mixture of hope and deep skepticism. 6 months ago, you could have approached us openly with that proposal. Instead, you chose deception and prepared for invasion. Why should I believe you're sincere now? Because, Scholar Vexini said quietly, you have demonstrated that conquest of your species would be far more costly than we calculated. Your individual actions here have invalidated months of research and strategic planning. If one human can accomplish this much, what could your entire species accomplish if properly motivated? The admission hung in the air between them. Marcus realized he was witnessing something unprecedented, an alien species acknowledging that humanity might be more than they had bargained for. But, he also knew that their current situation was far from resolved. Even if I believed your offer was genuine, he said, I don't have the authority to negotiate on behalf of humanity. And, you still represent an invasion force that could destroy us if negotiations fail. True, Commander ZYXera acknowledged. But, we could provide proof of our sincerity. Our ship contains detailed information about our homeworld's condition, our technological capabilities, and our population's true situation. We could share this information with your authorities as a gesture of good faith. Marcus considered this carefully. The oxygen in the chamber was now dangerously low, and he could feel his thoughts becoming sluggish. But, he needed to think clearly about this potential opportunity. What guarantees could you offer that this isn't just another deception? We could submit to detention by your authorities, Scholar Vexini offered. Voluntary containment while negotiations proceed. Our ship's crew could be placed under similar restrictions. Your people could examine our technology, verify our claims about our homeworld's condition, and assess our sincerity over time. It was an extraordinary offer, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that it might be another layer of deception. The Kythera had already proven themselves master manipulators, capable of maintaining false personas for months while gathering intelligence. How could he trust anything they said now? But, as he looked around the sealed chamber at the dying aliens, he realized that their current situation had changed the fundamental dynamics of their relationship. They were no longer in control, no longer dictating terms from a position of strength. For the first time since their arrival on Earth, the Kythera were vulnerable and desperate. There's something else you need to understand, Marcus said slowly. Even if your offer is genuine, humanity has a long history of being skeptical about aliens bearing gifts. After what you've revealed about your true intentions, trust will be extremely difficult to rebuild. We understand this, Commander ZYX Era said. But, the alternative is mutually assured destruction. Our people will not abandon their survival plans based on our failure here. If negotiations are not attempted, invasion will proceed despite the increased risks you have created. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of perhaps the most important decision in human history resting on his shoulders. In less than 2 days, the lockdown would end and the outside world would learn everything that had transpired in this chamber. The question was whether that revelation would lead to war or to the first genuine attempt at interspecies cooperation. When he opened his eyes, he found all 12 Kythera watching him with expressions that seemed almost human in their intensity. They were waiting for his decision, knowing that their survival and, possibly the survival of both species depended on what happened in the next few hours. Marcus reached for the control panel with a shaking hand, knowing that whatever choice he made would echo through history. The chamber fell silent except for the sound of failing life support systems and the labored breathing of beings from two worlds whose fates had become inextricably intertwined. Marcus's hand hesitated over the control panel as he weighed the impossible choice before him. The oxygen levels had dropped to critical levels, and he could see that even the Kythera were struggling. Their skin had taken on an alarming gray pallor, and their movements had become increasingly sluggish. Time was running out for all of them. Before I make any decision, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, I need you to do something that proves your sincerity. I need you to contact your ship and have them transmit a complete data package about your civilization to our recording systems. Everything, your technology, your population numbers, your military capabilities, your true environmental situation. No edited versions, no strategic omissions. Commander ZYX Sarah's large eyes widened slightly. That information could be used against us if negotiations fail. Yes, Marcus agreed. Just as the information you gathered here could be used against humanity. Consider it a mutual exchange of strategic vulnerabilities. If you're truly interested in cooperation rather than conquest, you should be willing to accept the same risks you were planning to impose on us. The Kythera communicated rapidly among themselves in their native language. Marcus could sense the urgency in their tones, the desperate calculation of rapidly diminishing options. Finally, Scholar Vexini approached the sealed communication panel. We will need you to temporarily lift the communication blackout to transmit the request to our ship, she said. But, the moment we do this, our ship's crew will detect the hostile conditions here. They may interpret your actions as an attack and respond accordingly. Marcus nodded grimly. That's a chance we'll have to take. But, here's what's going to happen, you'll transmit your request for the data package first. Only after our systems confirm receipt of their complete files will I consider modifying the lockdown protocols. With great care, Marcus adjusted the communication settings to allow a narrowband transmission to the Kythera ship. Scholar Vexini spoke rapidly into the device, her words a musical combination of sounds that human vocal cords could never reproduce. After several long minutes, she stepped back. It is done. Our ship's commander was surprised by the request and our current situation. But, he has agreed to comply. The data transfer should begin within moments. The chamber's main display screen flickered to life, showing streams of alien data flowing into the facility's computer systems. Marcus watched in fascination as information about an entire civilization unfolded before him, star charts showing the deteriorating condition of the Kythera home system, population surveys revealing a species facing extinction within decades, and technical specifications for technology that surpassed humanity's capabilities by orders of magnitude. But, what struck him most were the cultural files. The Kythera weren't the cold, calculating conquerors he had imagined. They were scientists, philosophers, and artists facing the slow death of everything they had ever known. Their plans for invasion had been born not from malice but from desperation, a species' final attempt to avoid extinction. Your star really is dying, Marcus said softly, studying the astronomical data. Within 47 of your years, Commander ZYX Era confirmed. We have searched for viable alternatives for over 3 centuries. Earth is the first world we have discovered that could sustain our population with minimal terraforming. But, we recognize now that sharing rather than taking might serve both our species better. Marcus felt the moral complexity of the situation settling over him like a heavy weight. These beings had planned to destroy humanity, but they had done so to save their own species from certain extinction. It didn't excuse their actions, but it did provide a context that changed everything about how this crisis might be resolved. "The data transfer is complete," Scholar Vexini announced. "Our ship has transmitted everything as requested. Now we must hope that your people and ours can find wisdom where we have found only desperation." Marcus studied the readouts confirming the successful transfer of the Kythera databases. Everything they had told him appeared to be accurate. Their star was indeed in the early stages of collapse, their planet was already experiencing climate disruption, and their population was declining rapidly due to increasing radiation exposure and ecosystem breakdown. But the technical specifications also revealed something else. The Kythera fleet orbiting Earth was smaller than they had led world governments to believe. They had perhaps a dozen ships rather than the hundreds that their carefully orchestrated displays of technology had suggested. Their invasion plans had relied heavily on deception and humanity's assumption that they faced overwhelming force. "Your fleet," Marcus said, studying the tactical information. "You've been projecting false ship signatures to make your forces appear larger than they actually are." Commander ZYXera's skin shifted to deep purple again. "Unnecessary deception. Our actual numbers are insufficient for conventional conquest. We had hoped that the appearance of overwhelming superiority would encourage surrender without significant resistance." Marcus almost laughed despite their dire situation. "So you plan to bluff an entire planet into submission? With supporting intelligence about human capabilities and vulnerabilities, it would have been effective," Scholar Vexini said defensively. "Your species' tendency to surrender when facing apparently hopeless odds was well documented in our initial studies." "Clearly, you didn't study the right examples," Marcus replied. "But this actually makes the situation more hopeful. If your forces are as limited as this data suggests, then peaceful coexistence becomes much more feasible. You need sanctuary, and we have the space to provide it in exchange for access to your technology and scientific knowledge." The conversation was interrupted by a new voice from the communication system, the Kythera ship's commander speaking urgently in their native language. Commander ZYXera responded quickly, then turned to Marcus with obvious alarm. "Our ship reports that human military forces have begun surrounding this facility. Fighter aircraft and ground units are taking positions for what appears to be an assault. Your authorities have apparently detected the communication blackout and are responding as if this were a hostile situation." Marcus felt his heart sink. He had hoped to have more time to work out some kind of arrangement before outside forces intervened. But the facility's emergency protocols would automatically alert military commanders if communication with the outside world was interrupted for more than 18 hours. He should have anticipated this response. "Can your ship explain the situation to the approaching forces?" he asked. "Not without revealing everything that has transpired here," Scholar Vexini replied. "And human military commanders may not be as flexible in their thinking as you have proven to be." Marcus realized they were rapidly approaching a crisis point. If the military forces outside interpreted the communication blackout and alien ship presence as a hostile situation, they might attack before anyone could explain the delicate negotiations happening inside the sealed chamber. The very breakthrough he was trying to achieve could be destroyed by the reasonable precautions of people trying to protect their planet. "We need to restore communications immediately," he said, moving toward the control panel. "But we're going to do this very carefully. I'm going to patch our conversation directly through to whoever's commanding the response force outside. They're going to hear everything we've discussed, see all the data we've gathered, and understand exactly what's at stake here." Commander ZYXera stood slowly, her movements careful in the thin atmosphere. "Professor Chen, if your military commanders reject our offer of cooperation, both our species may pay a terrible price. Our ship's commander has orders to defend himself if attacked, and any hostile action could trigger the very invasion we are now hoping to avoid." Marcus nodded grimly as he prepared to lift the communication blackout. "Then, we better hope that humanity's capacity for wisdom matches its capacity for warfare. Because the next few minutes are going to determine whether we're about to witness first contact or first blood." His finger hovered over the control that would restore normal communications, knowing that once he pressed it, events would be set in motion that none of them could control. Outside the facility, human and alien forces faced each other across a gulf of misunderstanding that could explode into violence at any moment. Inside the chamber, representatives of two worlds waited to learn whether intelligence and desperation could overcome fear and mistrust. The next decision Marcus made would echo through history as either humanity's greatest triumph or its final tragedy. Marcus pressed the communication control with steady fingers despite the tremor in his hands from oxygen deprivation. Immediately, the chamber filled with the urgent voices of multiple human commanders coordinating what appeared to be a significant military response. Facility 7, this is General Harrison, Joint Chiefs of Staff. You are ordered to respond immediately. We have detected unknown energy signatures and potential hostile activity at your location. Marcus activated the general broadcast system, ensuring that his words would reach not only the military commanders but also the Kythera ship orbiting above. General Harrison, this is Professor Marcus Chen. I am alive and unharmed, currently in emergency session with the Kythera delegation. We have a situation that requires immediate high-level consultation before any military action is taken. The silence that followed lasted several long seconds. When General Harrison's voice returned, it carried a mixture of relief and suspicion. Professor Chen, explain your current status. Are you being held against your will? Marcus looked around at the 12 aliens who had been planning humanity's conquest just hours earlier, now watching him with expressions that could only be described as hopeful desperation. The situation is complex, General. I am not being held hostage, but we are all currently sealed in the research chamber due to emergency protocols I activated. More importantly, I have obtained critical intelligence about Kythera intentions and capabilities that fundamentally changes our entire understanding of the first contact situation. Stand by, Professor, came the crisp military response. Marcus could hear rapid conversations in the background as the general consulted with other commanders. We're establishing a secure link with the Pentagon and the United Nations Security Council. Whatever you've discovered, you'll need to brief the highest levels of government immediately. Over the next several minutes, Marcus found himself connected to a hastily assembled conference call that included the Secretary-General of the United Nations, the directors of multiple intelligence agencies, and military commanders from several nations. As he began explaining what he had learned about the Kythera's true intentions and current crisis, he could hear the shock and alarm in their voices. Let me understand this correctly, Professor, the Secretary-General interrupted. These beings have spent 6 months gathering intelligence for an invasion of Earth, but they're now claiming to want peaceful cooperation instead? That's an oversimplification, Marcus replied, feeling his strength ebbing in the thin air. They are facing species extinction due to their star's deterioration. Their invasion plans were born from desperation, not malice. And, crucially, their actual military capabilities are far more limited than they led us to believe. Commander ZYXera stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly through the communication system. Honorable leaders of Earth, she said, using formal diplomatic protocols, I am Commander ZYXera of the Kythera Expeditionary Force. What Professor Chen says is accurate. We came here prepared for conquest because we saw no alternative for our species' survival. But his actions have forced us to confront the true cost of such a course and to consider other options. The conference call erupted in multiple conversations as world leaders tried to process this unprecedented situation. General Harrison's voice cut through the chaos. Professor Chen, what is your assessment of their sincerity? Are we dealing with a genuine change in their intentions or a tactical deception? Marcus took a careful breath, knowing that his answer might determine the fate of both species. Based on my observations over the past day, and considering the intelligence they've provided about their true situation, I believe their offer of cooperation is genuine. But I also believe they're desperately afraid that rejection will force them back to invasion as their only option for survival. The data they've transmitted supports their claims, came a new voice that Marcus recognized as the director of the CIA. Our analysts have been reviewing their files for the past hour. Their star really is dying, their population really is in decline, and their fleet really is much smaller than we estimated. But, their technology is still far superior to ours in most areas. Scholar Vexini joined the conversation. Honorable humans, we have made terrible errors in our approach to your species. But, we hope that wisdom might yet prevail over fear. We offer not conquest but partnership, our knowledge in exchange for sanctuary, our science in exchange for space to build new homes away from our dying world. Marcus could hear heated debates breaking out among the world leaders. Some voices called for immediate military action to neutralize the threat while they had the advantage of superior numbers. Others argued for caution, pointing out that attacking now could trigger the very invasion they sought to prevent. Still others suggested that the opportunity for genuine cooperation with an advanced alien species was too valuable to risk through hasty action. The immediate tactical situation, General Harrison said, cutting through the debates, is that we have alien forces both inside and outside our territory, with unclear intentions and superior technology. Whether we proceed with military action or diplomatic engagement, we need to establish clear protocols for managing this crisis. Marcus felt a wave of dizziness as the oxygen levels dropped even further. He realized that time was running out for everyone in the sealed chamber. General, I need to address the immediate survival issue. The air in this chamber is nearly exhausted. We need to restore life support within the next hour or everyone here will die, including the Kythera delegation that represents our only direct contact with their species. The urgency of the survival situation seemed to focus the scattered discussions. Professor Chen, the Secretary General said, can you safely restore normal operations to the facility? Marcus looked at Commander ZYXera, who nodded slowly. I believe so, but it will require cooperation from both sides. The Kythera ship must maintain its current position and avoid any actions that could be interpreted as hostile. Meanwhile, your military forces need to step back enough to allow normal facility operations without appearing to prepare for attack. Both conditions are reasonable, General Harrison confirmed. But, I want continuous communication throughout this process. Any deviation from agreed protocols will result in immediate defensive action. Commander ZYXera spoke directly to her ship in the Kythera language, her words carrying what sounded like urgent commands. After receiving a response, she turned back to the human commanders. Our ship will maintain current position and remain in passive mode. We request that your forces do the same while we resolve the immediate survival crisis. Marcus initiated the emergency unlock sequence for the chamber, feeling fresh air begin to flow as the life support systems reactivated. But, even as his breathing became easier, he knew that the larger crisis was far from resolved. They had bought time for both immediate survival and continued negotiations, but the fundamental question remained, could two species that had been preparing for war find a way to coexist peacefully? This is going to be the most complex negotiation in human history, the Secretary General observed. We're dealing with beings who have technology we can barely understand, facing a crisis we've never experienced, offering solutions we've never considered. True, Marcus agreed, feeling strength returning with the improved air quality. But, we're also dealing with people, and, yes, I do think of them as people now, who are as afraid of extinction as we are. Fear can drive species to war, but it can also motivate them to find creative solutions for survival. Over the following hours, as the immediate crisis stabilized, Marcus found himself serving as an unlikely bridge between two worlds. The Kythera delegation remained in the facility under voluntary protective custody while their ship maintained position under the watchful eyes of human military forces. Both sides had stepped back from the brink of war, but the difficult work of building trust and negotiating coexistence had only just begun. The breakthrough had come not through superior firepower or technological advantage, but through one human's willingness to risk everything on the belief that understanding was possible even in the darkest circumstances. Marcus had taught the aliens about human killing techniques, but, in the end, he had proven that humanity's greatest weapon was not its capacity for destruction but its stubborn refusal to accept defeat when fighting for something worth preserving. As news of the situation spread around the world, humanity began the long, uncertain process of learning to share their planet with refugees from a dying star. The negotiations would be complex, the challenges enormous, and success far from guaranteed. But, for the first time since the Kythera had arrived, both species had hoped that the future might hold cooperation rather than conquest. Marcus looked around at the aliens who had once planned humanity's destruction, now working alongside human scientists to plan a shared future. It had taken the threat of mutual extinction to bring them together, but perhaps that was the most human lesson of all, that sometimes the greatest triumphs come from the darkest moments, and that hope can survive even when everything seems lost.